All right, everybody, welcome into another Fantrax Football Friday. I'm your host, Colin McTammany, and I'm joined today on a very, very upfront topic, the Rashee Rice legal update. And I have a complete expert with me, Drew Davenport. Drew is someone I've been following for years on Twitter. Plenty of other people follow him. He is the go-to guy for any time we find ourselves looking into the insight for the legal updates for perhaps suspensions or legal trouble that any of the players in the NFL are facing. It's not a topic that we want to talk about, but unfortunately, we have to talk about for fantasy football purposes. Of course, what we know about this of the incident we're going to talk about here in a second. But before we do get started, I do want to introduce my guest, Drew Davenport. Drew, why don't you introduce yourself and let those who are watching or don't maybe know enough about you yet, a little insight on your background here.
Yeah, I've been practicing as a criminal defense attorney for the last 23 years. I started out in private practice. I'm now a public defender. So I see thousands of criminal cases every year. And that's the area that I'm coming at this case from. I don't consider myself to be an expert in what Roger Goodell thinks or what he's going to do in these cases. I give educated guesses, but really my area of expertise that we're talking about today would be in criminal defense.
Yeah, again, I want to reiterate here, by no means do either of us, myself or Drew here, want to downplay the situation that Rashee Rice is in, but we will dive into the facts of the case. We'll talk about what he could be facing, and then it feels a little weird to talk about, but everyone wants to know, what is Rashee Rice facing as far as his playing career here. So we'll dive into the incident real quick here. And Drew, thanks again for taking the time to talk about this. On March 30th, there was a collision on a North Dallas highway. Rashee Rice, the Kansas City wide receiver, was driving a Lamborghini that was registered to him, a Corvette driven by another man, Theodore Knox, who's a student athlete at SMU. Both vehicles were speeding, lost control, and caused a collision involving 4 other vehicles. There's a video of Rashee Rice exiting the Lamborghini and walking away from the scene. And 2 people were taken to the hospital. 2 were treated at the scene. Since then, of course, everyone has taken to Twitter and social media, set ablaze, what they think of the situation, their opinions, et cetera, et cetera. But what we do know at this point is that Rashee Rice has retained counsel as of April 1st. A warrant was issued for his arrest on April 10th. And then just yesterday, April 11th, Rashee Rice surrendered to police. He's being charged with 8 counts, one count of aggravated assault, 1 count of collision involving serious bodily injury, and then 6 additional counts of collision involving injury. So, Drew, I do have a couple questions for you, obviously, here. How serious is this for Rashee Rice from a legal standpoint on a scale of 1 to 10? 1 being, this is no big deal at all, which, of course, I think we can all agree it is. But 10 being extremely serious. He's done. It's, his life is over. His career is over.
Well, I still think we're talking on the lower end of that scale.
Okay.
I understand that there's a lot of emotion around this case, which I'm a little bit surprised about because I didn't see that. Excuse me. I didn't see that kind of emotion coming out about Jordan Addison or about Marquise Brown or some of these guys that have gotten caught driving really fast. There seems to be that people, we've hit a nerve with Rashee Rice for some reason. I'm not sure why. So I want to take that emotion out a little bit and just say that the charges he's facing are quite serious. Felony charges are nothing you mess around with. But I've talked to some local Dallas area attorneys. It's my understanding that these kind of charges, even if he's found guilty of the more serious charges, they're still probationable offenses, meaning he wouldn't have to spend any time in prison just because he's found guilty. Now, a lot of that is going to be driven by his past history and what the wishes are of the victims that were involved, and also the district attorney and what he wants to do with the case. So there's a million variables that we don't really know exactly how this is going to shake out. And that's something I've cautioned people about from the beginning. We'll get into the nuts and bolts of that as we move on. But really at this point, I'm really only about a 3 or a 4 on how much trouble is he in with the legal system at this point.
Yeah, I think a lot of the times we see words like warrant, surrender, 8 charges for something like this, and it can cause a bit of pandemonium. So let's continue on here, just breaking it down. What is next for Rashee Rice? So we now know that he's turned himself in and he's been released same day. When can we expect significant develops for this case?
Yeah, and you mentioned the word warrant. It sounds nasty, but a lot of charges are filed on a warrant. That's not unusual at all, especially these kind of serious charges. Now, I think it's a little weird that he has an attorney and the police have already spoken with his attorney, yet they put a warrant out. I think that's odd. I don't know if that signals some sort of stance from the DA that he's going to play hardball on this one. I don't know that. That's a little bit of off the cuff speculation, but um, generally the warrant isn't that big a deal. He's already been processed through. That's something I said was going to happen. When you hire an attorney, you hire them for the purpose of getting walked through the system rather than going in there, risk being incarcerated for a couple days while you post the bond. So he's already out now after having posted his bond. He'll have a court date next where he's going to plead not guilty. And then after that, they'll set it for a pretrial conference, which in different states is called different things. So it could be called a status conference or whatever the case may be. That's the time where the prosecutor and the defense attorney are really going to sit down and start to hammer things out. Now, I would guess that his attorney is already working on that stuff. But the next actual court date is going to be some sort of status conference about whether or not there's a possible resolution on the horizon to settle the case.
Right, some sort of meeting of the minds if they can strike a deal rather than let this play out through a trial per se.
Correct.
When you hear someone enter a plea of guilty or not guilty, and we have, evidence such as the car that's crashed, registered to him, the video of him walking away. I think when some people may see him, more likely than not, enter a plea of not guilty, there might be some confusion as to, well, why is he entering that plea if we have all of this evidence against him? Explain that a little bit. Why would he enter a plea of not guilty?
Well, the first thing I caution everybody about is that we don't know what that evidence is. Okay. So we think we know.
Mhm.
And we thought we knew in the Alvin Kamara case what evidence they had. I didn't see the video of that case until really, really late in the
Mhm.
game. So we don't really know what they have. So that's the first thing I'd caution everybody. When you say, oh, he should plead guilty, he did X, Y, and Z. Well, we don't know what is going to be in that discovery packet. There's going to be a bunch of information that we don't have access to. So that's the first thing I would just slow everybody down and say, we don't know what we don't know. And that's one of those things that I always, it doesn't go over very well with my 9-year-old, but you don't know what you don't know. So just let me handle it. That's what I say to him. And in this situation, I'm not saying let me handle it. I'm saying everybody just kind of breathe because we don't know. Now, what ends up happening is, how can we vet those different types of evidence that we think are out there? Because there was one report that they had a bag and they were throwing guns in a bag and taking them away from the scene, and that stuff never came to pass with the police. Now, I'm not saying it's not true. I'm saying we got to be able to verify some of this stuff, and all we know right now is that there's video of this Lamborghini kind of skidding across the highway. We do have video of him walking away from the scene, but we know very little else. We just found out today that there was 119 mile an hour speed that he supposedly clocked at before the accident. So again, it's those kind of things that are going to come out that we don't know what we don't know yet. So it's really hard for us to prejudge. But back to your original question, I'm sorry this is a long answer, but
No problem.
you plead not guilty because of the fact that the knowledge that you're going to get from the police department and what the prosecutor has, all that stuff is important to handling the case properly. And a lot of people will say, well, if you did it, you should just plead guilty. But that's not how our system works. The United States justice system is set up as an adversarial system. And that means it works best when the two parties go like this. And in order for that to happen, you don't just walk in and plead guilty, even if you are. You plead not guilty, you see what evidence they have against you, and people say, oh, well, but if you did it, you should plead guilty. Well, no, that's just saying I'm not going to avail myself of the rights that are guaranteed to me by the Constitution. And that seems silly. You have these rights, use them. They're called rights for a reason. They're not privileges. They're not things that that you have to beg for. These are things that are guaranteed to you. So I just tell everyone, use those rights, plead not guilty, let the attorney unravel it and see what it is that they can prove and what they can't. So it's a super normal thing to go in there and plead not guilty and get all the information in the case. That's essentially what you're saying is, I'm not guilty until you show me what you've got. And then if they've got it, then that's when you work out a deal or you enter a plea. And I would also point out too that I know that there's 8 counts, and that seems pretty scary, but they charge 1 count for every individual that's involved in the accident. And also they charged one of the individuals, the one who went to the hospital, they charged that one alternatively, which means they charged it under 2 different code sections, one for serious bodily injury and one for injury. So in case they were to lose the serious bodily injury argument, hey, there was only stitches, that wasn't serious, then they can still win on the lesser charge. So 8 counts isn't really as nasty as it sounds, even though in a vacuum you would rather not have 8, you'd rather have 3 or whatever. But yeah,
And, a little bit of a chess game here. It could get pled down to 3 counts. We don't really know that yet. Obviously, as you said, we don't know anything. So we do need this to play out rather than jump to conclusions, which brings me to my next point. And again, obviously, there's a very situation, but we do want to talk about it. And we do want to talk about it as it relates to fantasy football and the NFL, because this is the star receiver for the Kansas City Chiefs who just won the Super Bowl. There is an impact here that people want to know about. Obviously, why it's such a big deal in the first place. When can we hear, or could we hear, a response from the NFL as far as a suspension goes? Is this something we will know, you think, before the 2024 season?
I think so, but that's based on the fact that I'm sort of reading between the lines with Rice's counsel and what they've done so far in the case. They're playing a very straightforward game, saying, "Hey, he messed up. He wants to make people whole." Alvin Kamara was fighting that thing tooth and nail. That took a long time. Now, felony cases have a longer timeline than misdemeanors do. That's because the speedy trial is different for a felony than it is for a misdemeanor. So the case has to be heard quicker on a misdemeanor than it does on a felony. So that leaves it open to bleed into the season if Rice is going to really play tough with this. I don't see that happening based on what they're doing so far. Again, that's such a wild guess, though. You have to understand that. I'm reading into what his attorney's saying and stuff like that. But I would not expect the NFL to get involved until there's adjudication of the case.
Mm.
And I pointed this out on Twitter earlier, but Jordan Addison was going 140 miles an hour. Marquise Brown was going 126. They didn't hurt anybody, but the league didn't even talk about it. They didn't even issue a statement after those cases were over. So Rice's case is by several degrees worse, but I don't expect them to comment on it until there's a resolution. And I've been told, at least locally, that the district attorney is big on diversion pleas and programs, which means that he would have a chance to earn a dismissal. I'm not saying that's going to happen because this is a pretty serious charge, but plea deals happen all the time in cases like this, especially when Rice has no prior criminal history or traffic history that I've been made aware of yet.
Yeah, I think that's really important. The variables you spoke of at the top of the show, and one of those variables could simply be the judge, who he is as a person. I know I live in the state of Pennsylvania, and the courts around here are very big on, and this is just one county of Pennsylvania. I'm on the east side of Pennsylvania, but the courts around here are very big on plea deals as well, first time offender programs, stuff like that. So it's going to be interesting to see where this goes from here. I think a lot of the time people make the mistake of comparing suspensions. Unfortunately, there are so many of them to look at, but oh, well, Deshaun Watson got this for what he did, and Ray Rice did this, and Henry Ruggs, crashed a car and did this, and it can be a little dangerous to compare that because every situation is so different. So, given the facts of what we know for this case, and of course, I'm not trying to put you on the spot and have you tell us the right answer here, but what might a suspension look like for Rashee Rice, just based on what we do know now?
Well, you make a great point that all those other cases, they're just different. And I get plenty of clients who come in every day and say, well, my friend got a DUI and then he got it reduced to this. So let's do that. I'm like, that's not how it works. Every case is different. It doesn't matter down to the little details. You can tell me the charges are the same, but the cases are different. So it is dangerous to say, okay, well, Henry Ruggs got this or Deshaun Watson got this. Watson's dealing with sexual assault situation. Ray Rice was dealing with domestic violence. I mean, heck, we have allegations that Von Miller strangled his girlfriend not once, but twice. And then she called 911 right after and said he did it. And they haven't even issued, the NFL hasn't even issued a statement, let alone to put the guy on the exempt list. So I guess I'd be shocked if there was an exempt list issue here. I'm still looking right around 1 to 2 games. Now, if somebody came to me earlier, somebody very smart who is an attorney also, and said this just feels like it's going to be more than two, and I got to be honest, I'm not going to push back real hard on that because I can understand it does feel that way, but I think it feels that way because we don't have anything else going on right now. There's no other issues. There's no other legal issues. There's no games happening. Like we're just sinking our teeth into this and we're just like worked up in a frenzy over it. I think in a month, when the case finally gets to a court date or 2 months, it will have died down a little bit. And I think that we're still looking at a fairly low level suspension. Could it come in at 3 or 4 games? Sure, that's absolutely possible. But what I've been telling people, and it's an unfortunate fact of what we do or what I do, that I have to advise people in fantasy football when there's these serious personal issues happening. But look, people aren't tuned in because they want to hear me talk about pretrials and motions to suppress. They're here because they want a fantasy advice. And what I've told people is in dynasty leagues, especially, go out and grab Rashee Rice. He still has a long career ahead of him, playing for Patrick Mahomes at least for the next 3 years. Go get Rashee Rice. By let's say he gets 4 games, and I'm off by a couple games. By week 5, you're gonna love that you sent a mid-second rounder for Rashee Rice. And the same thing in redraft. If his ADP plummets because he gets a couple games, that's great because some of the stuff I was seeing the second and third round for Rashee Rice, I think that's a little bit rich for a guy, playing an offense with Hollywood Brown and Travis Kelce. That's a different situation. But point being, if you're seeing that dip, go out and grab it because I really, even if he gets 3 or 4, when I'm saying he's going to get 1 or 2, I still think by game 5, then you're going to be happy that you have him.
We could also see some sort of appeal process as well. Look at a guy like Alvin Kamara last year, missed the first 3 games and then went on to average, I believe, over 20 fantasy points per game the rest of the season. So is a good asset to have if this does happen for Rashee Rice. We'll wrap up the legal conversation there, Drew. I really appreciate you talking to me about it. Letting the people know about it. I do want to reiterate just one more time. Obviously, this is a very serious situation. We're not making light of it by discussing it, but discussing it we will because it does have an impact on the NFL, fantasy football, what people want to know about. Luckily, no one was injured further than what they were or was killed, perhaps, in situations we've seen before. You talked about Jordan Addison going 140 miles per hour for a dog emergency last year. Rashee Rice probably would have preferred a situation like that than what he's in now. But we'll let it play out. We'll check the facts. We'll check back in come, July or August when we're about to draft. Hopefully we have more information then. After such a serious conversation, let's end on a fun note here. It's my understanding that you are a Pittsburgh Steelers fan. So I'm going to hit you with a couple rapid fire questions here as a Steelers fan. You ready?
I am. Hit me.
All right. So who do you want to be the week 1 starter between Russell Wilson and Justin Fields as a Steelers fan?
For me, it's Russell Wilson, no doubt. I love watching Justin Fields play, and I love him as a fantasy football asset. I'm just not sure he's ever going to be a high-level NFL starter. And that goes back to something that my buddy Zach Kruger over at NBC talks about a lot, and that's pressure to sack rate. I just don't love the fact that Fields' pressure to sack rate is so terrible, and that carried over from college. It tends to be a pretty sticky stat that stays with quarterbacks. I just don't think he's ever going to be a high-level NFL quarterback, and I think Russell Wilson, in the right spot, has the potential to be good for another 2 or 3 years.
Okay. Big decision coming up there. May 2nd, they have to decide whether or not to exercise Justin Fields' 5th-year option, so we'll be keeping an eye on that. My next question is, who will be the week 1 starter? Is it my, assumption that you think it will also be Russell Wilson?
Yeah, I think so. I think he fits Arthur Smith's type of scheme and tendencies really well. One thing that he does a lot, did it in Atlanta even when the offense was struggling and people were complaining about him, but he did it really well in Tennessee with Ryan Tannehill, was run a lot of play action. They run a ton of play action, and that's something that Russell Wilson could be really good at. He's still got a great deep ball, run a lot of play action, take shots down the field to George Pickens. I think it's going to be Russ.
Yeah, I think George Pickens is slowly climbing up my rankings just as we get further and further into the offseason, closer to the regular season. You're on the clock as Pittsburgh's GM in 2 weeks, less than 2 weeks from today. With pick 20, what position are you hoping for? What player, maybe even more specifically, do you want the Pittsburgh Steelers to draft?
You don't want me guessing a player. I'm not an NFL draft guru. I'd really like to see offensive line.
Okay.
That's absolutely the biggest need, I think, for us right now.
Yeah, I think getting rid of Deontay Johnson, trading him to the Panthers, everyone wants to rush and say, oh, this is great receiver class, add a receiver. But Arthur Smith, I think, wants to run the ball. They have Najee Harris. They want to protect Russell Wilson. I think offensive line would be a great add. Putting you on the spot. Last question here. Way too early record prediction. We know Mike Tomlin has a very, very successful history as the head coach of the Pittsburgh Steelers. What is the record of the 2024 Pittsburgh Steelers?
Well, I got to give Tomlin credit. He's a very good coach. That's for a different show. I don't know that he's a great coach. I think he's a very good coach. But I think Russell Wilson's going to help a lot. They're addressing needs in the right spots. So I'm going to give them 10-7.
10-7. Well, hopefully that will be enough to earn at least a wild card spot. Drew, thank you very much for joining me today on a Fantrax Football Friday to break down the Rashee Rice legal update situation, talk a little Pittsburgh Steelers. If you want to follow Drew, you should be following Drew. He is at Drew Davenport FF on Twitter. Make sure you're following him, especially as it pertains to the Rashee Rice case. And everybody have a great weekend. Drew, I'll catch you later.
Thanks for having me.
See ya.